Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So here I am in Limerick beside the River Shannon, which is the longest river in Ireland, also the widest at 1.7 miles. The sea is that way, so you can tell from the flow of it, but it's tidal. As you get further west, it'll be the tide coming back in. I don't think the tide ever comes up here to Limerick. There you can see King John's Castle, which is the oldest castle in Ireland. So laid down in about 1180 under Henry II. His son John was over here, briefly Lord of Ireland, didn't get along well with us by laughing at the shaggy beards of our chieftains, because Ireland, of course, were divided into many kingdoms back then. We had a high king at Tara, the capital wasn't really fixed, with no royal dynasty. We had a regular free-for-all to decide which there was going to be the high king. And the high king continued for over a century after we'd recognised Henry II, King of England, as Lord of Ireland, because at the Synod of Cashel, our ecclesiastical leadership recognised Henry II as our liege lord, and at the Treaty of Windsor, the High King of Ireland, Rory O'Connor, and other Irish potentates will recognise Henry II as our rightful overlord. But so we're divided into tribes of semi-nomadic, the Gaels, because we followed these great lowing herds of cattle. We didn't largely follow sedentary agriculture until the 17th century, till the potato was introduced by the English. Now, I know we're supposed to be anti-English and say that every single thing that ever came to Ireland from England was terrible, but surely the potato was great for us. Up until then, the culture of the soil wasn't so viable. I know you can grow barley here, but for a lot of cereal crops, it's not the greatest here, because there's just so much precipitation. In Ireland, we've got the 40 shades of grey. That's why I have windows to let more darkness in. And so it was just a torrential downpour for several days beforehand. Why St. Patrick had that prophecy. He said that 7 years before Doomsday, the whole of Ireland would be submerged by a flood. I remember very heavy floods in 1987. I thought it might be about to happen. Anyway, so I'm here at a famous spot in Limerick where there is the Treaty Stone. So here it is. Now, there were two sieges of Limerick, one in 1642. I won't go into that one. The Treaty Stone is not relevant to that. During the so-called English Civil War, which was obviously fought in the three kingdoms. But coming on to after 1690. So our rightful king was James II, and he was a Catholic and said there should be equality for the two denominations. And so Parliament met in Dublin, and almost every single member of it was a Catholic, with a majority. But James II signed the secret Treaty of Dover with Louis XIV, and the Sun King said, as soon as the security of your throne allows, you must bring back Catholicism as the state religion. Only a few years earlier, there'd been the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in France, and Huguenots, that's to say Protestants, were then discriminated by law. Many of them fled to Great Britain, some to Ireland, where the Protestant minority was in the saddle. Anyway, cut a long story short, 1688, James II is overthrown by William of Orange, who was Stadtholder of the Netherlands. William III, being James II's nephew and son-in-law, because William of Orange, he married his first cousin. Keep it in the family, nice. So what did the royal family like to do at Halloween? Pumpkin. So James II took ship, he fled England, having dropped the Great Seal of England into the Thames, thinking that no legislation would be valid without that. He'd briefly been detained by fishermen who'd let him go on his way. And then Parliament said, no, we didn't overthrow him, he has abdicated by fleeing the realm, which was his constitutional innovation. So they recognised William III and his wife Mary II as joint sovereigns. Anyway, kings of England. The Scots Parliament likewise, but the Irish Parliament, we still recognise James II. So James II came here as a support base for him, because perhaps 80% of the population was Catholic at the time, Protestant majority only in Dublin, and maybe some of the northeastern counties like Antrim, Down, Armagh. That was about that fairly recent English, Scots, Welsh, and even Manx immigrants. But so William the III won the Battle of the Boyne on the 1st of July 1690. We used to go by the Julian calendar in those days. Only 1752 in Ireland and Great Britain we adopted the Gregorian calendar like the rest of Christendom. Or so I should say Western Christendom, like the Catholic world, the Orthodox world not till 1918. Anyhow, so then James II fled. the defeat was not catastrophic. It wasn't a rout, but he chose to sail to France. He could have tried defending Dublin, but anyway, some people still held out for him. You may know that orange song, you know, the Sash, and the various other battles. It had been seen at Enniskillen, Ochra, and the Boyne, so various other battles. But there was a siege of Cork at the time, because we had a walled city at that fort, which still stands. Most cities are walled, and there was a siege of Limerick. There was a siege of Ennis as well. But anyway, so eventually a deal was worked out. William III come over with lots of Dutch troops, even Swedish troops. Some of his Dutch troops were black from the Dutch colonies in the Antilles, or their ports on the coast of Africa. If you read Lord Macaulay's History of England, it says a lot about it. But anyway, so Limerick was besieged, and should they let in refugees, and they're letting them over Tobin Bridge, which, creeping their defences, opened them to attack. So, cut to the chase, eventually a treaty was signed. It was agreed that the city could surrender, and the Catholic majority in Ireland would still have equality. No discrimination on the basis of religious denomination. Seemed quite a reasonable deal, because had they taken the city by storm, they would have pillaged it. They wouldn't have given quarter. Such are the laws of the 17th century, that if they negotiated surrender, then that's it, their lives would be spared, their property would be spared. They might be prisoners of war or something like that, but that you couldn't just spread rapine and ruin there. And the women were not to be ravished, and they were quite often violated when cities were taken by storm. These were fairly barbaric times before the Geneva Convention. So that was that. So nobody was killed after the siege of Limerick. The treaty was supposed to be signed on this stone. Some people think that's impossible. But then the Parliament of Ireland met. And now I think a lot of the Catholic nobility, a lot of them had fled in 1607, the flight of the Earls to France and Spain, when James I had caught wind they were planning another insurrection. I didn't think that was true, actually, because they'd just been defeated in 1607. The Treaty of Hampton Court had been only signed 3 years earlier between England and Spain, and in Ireland we knew we couldn't defeat the king without help from the Spanish, some other major European power, and Spain was not interested. They just ended a 20-year Anglo-Spanish war. But such of our upper orders as remained, Catholic upper orders, they mostly left after 1691. So the Irish Parliament met, and then they passed this discriminatory legislation. So laws which were intended to make it impossible for a Roman Catholic to be, say, an army officer, a naval officer. We had an Irish army at the time, by the way, and a judge, a member of Parliament, a peer. You might inherit the title, but you couldn't be in the House of Lords in Dublin. So, because you'd have to take an oath which was designed to be unacceptable to a papist, saying that the Bishop of Rome has no authority in this realm of Ireland and so forth, recognising the king as the rightful head of the church. Now, to a Catholic, of course, the Pope is the rightful head of the church, and the Church of Ireland is not a proper church. So the Church of Ireland was a minority, 15% of the population at most. There were Presbyterians who were also discriminated against. Presbyterians mostly Scots descent, whereas the Church of Ireland mostly English and Welsh descent. The Methodists hadn't come along. A few other groups like the Baptists emerged. Now, the English, Welsh and Scots, those 17th century immigrants, they mostly intermarried, and the distinction with them was pretty soon lost. They had a very British identity, as in both they identified with England as much as Wales, as much as Scotland, and to a lesser extent Ireland. They'd often call themselves Irish, and the word British had re-emerged in the 16th century, only been started to be used a lot from the 17th century, from the 1630s, because it's been largely forgotten for centuries. Anyway, so that was the Treaty of Limerick, which was broken quite quickly, as legend has it, because the ink had not yet dried on the treaty, so it could be broken. But I think it wasn't until actually several months later when the relevant legislation was passed. Now, William III was not anti-Catholic. Indeed, he'd had an all-Catholic regiment, the Blue Guards. He'd had Catholic confidants, but he couldn't thwart this. He felt he shouldn't, although yes, technically he had the right to veto it. But he did signed it, and it was announced in Parliament, le roi le veut, as in the king wants it. They still say it in French to this day. Of course, nowadays it's la reine le veut. Because he said, well, what we have finally established is the supremacy of Parliament, and also that the crown is in the gift of Parliament. They can alter the line of succession, and they did. His wife died childless just a few years later. He died in 1701, and then his cousin and indeed sister-in-law, Queen Anne, she took over. And there was this rumour going around that William III was gay, But these stories about him being homosexual only came out decades after his death. So if you're a supporter of his, even if you believed it, you wouldn't have said it, because that was regarded as being so disreputable at the time. So it was only his foes put about that story, which I don't credit myself. It wouldn't bother me one whit if it was an absolute screamer, but I just don't think that there's any documentary evidence, any eyewitness, and who did he have a gay relationship with, and all the rest of it. So it was an attempt to traduce him, Protestantism, the Williamite cause. I'm not a Williamite myself, actually. I think it would be better if James II had won the Jacobites, so he'd fled abroad, and there was his son, who called himself James III, the old pretender, and then the grandson, Charles Edward Stuart, the young pretender, and they, through the 18th century, made a few attempts at comebacks in Great Britain, never in Ireland, curiously. So they maintained Catholicism, living in Rome most of the time. And then after 1746, when it was defeated, that was their cause was seen as a forlorn hope. The Pope then recognised the Hanoverians as the rightful kings of Ireland, kings of Great Britain. Again, something in Irish nationalism we would rather forget. So that's the treaty stone, the famous treaty stone of law. Okay, so I shall switch it off. That's enough here from Limerick, which is Ireland's fourth city. Williamite, I hope I pronounced it correctly. I'm no Gael Gore, meaning barren land in Ireland, despite it being fairly fertile land. Oh, on this bridge, is this Thomond Bridge? Because North Munster is Thomond, is the Munster flag, the three gold crowns on a blue field, but now they've also got a red background because, you know, it's for Munster rugby, really. Okay, that's enough. Toodaloo.